in 1 second, this should be streaming on YouTube for everybody who won't be in the Zoom. All right, I think we're good. Okay, sorry about that. We're all ready to go. So, what I want to talk to you about are some handling habits that we all are going to, some handling situations that we're all going to experience on a daily basis most of the time with our horses. There are some things that are very important to the horse that I'd like to share with you, some perspectives to help you think about how you handle your horse a little bit differently. And the angle that I'd like to take this from with you is how much these things affect your horse's relationship with you, their overall well-being, and their posture. And if you know me, you know that posture and the horse's well-being are very, very important. So in this webinar, I'm going to talk to you about how to support good posture and your horse's overall well-being by the way that you handle and handling from your horse's perspective with care. So Kevin, you can go to the next slide. So firstly, I should introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. I have been doing this for almost 15 years now. And the way that I think about myself is a little bit of a hodgepodge of everything. I was originally a Western rider. I've done a lot of Western, specifically ranch riding. And I have transferred over more into the dressage world, but I keep a foot kind of squarely in each world. Um, so the picture in the bottom left is where it all started for me. I started riding in a military riding school in South America, Venezuela specifically, because my dad was Air Force. And I started to ride at about 5 years old, and I was jumping 3 feet by 6 years old, just because I'm kind of a crazy go-getter, kind of a literal taking sort of a girl. And now I focus mostly on rehabilitative work. So I take a lot of horses who need mental or physical rehabilitation, and that's most of my focus. So the things that I'm going to be talking you through today, I really want to stress just how much helping a horse be well is not just the training, but it's the general angle that we take on how we handle them. So this right here is kind of my upbringing and how I ended up here today. You can go to the next slide. Relationship is kind of a buzzword right now. So there's a lot of focus on relationship, which I think is fantastic. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on what a relationship is. We tend to anthropomorphize relationship. You know, all over social media, you see these kissy face photos and these bareback, bridleless, long dress on the beach kind of a thing. But what does relationship really mean when we're coming from the horse's perspective? What is a connection? Because really, if you think about what does a horse want more than anything, they want friends, forage, and food. Those are the most important things to a horse. And when we sit down and think about what each of our needs are for safety and well-being, we're pretty opposite when we come right down to it. You know, we want to be still, to be quiet, to feel safe. We want horse to be we want the horse to be still and to be quiet for us to feel safe, I'm saying. And the horse wants to move to be safe. So we're on two completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And how do we bring us two together so that we can have an actual relationship where we're both benefiting? That's what I would like to talk to you about in this webinar is a relationship is not just this mushy gushy huggy kissy thing, although there's nothing wrong with the touchy feely stuff. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's sort of like developing a relationship with your spouse or any friend. You're there for each other and you talk to each other in the way that each other needs. It's not just about getting your hugs and your kisses in. It's not just about spending time together. It's about laying in a foundation of trust that you're going to be there for the other one in the way that the other one needs. And that's the key here is it's not the way you like, it's the way that the horse needs. And that's how you develop trust with the horse. So this is the foundation. You know, I'm often asked, how do you develop a relationship with a horse? And to me, developing a relationship with a horse means proving day in and day out that you are a trustworthy person because you're going to look at things from the horse's perspective and present things to the horse in a way that they can understand. I should mention at this point before I get too far that for all of you guys that are here, I have a surprise waiting for you at the end that I think you will like. And stick around and I'll reveal it at the end. Kevin, you can go to the next slide. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over some things, and here's a basic rundown. I'm going to talk about what good posture is. We're going to talk about alignment and why it matters, and then we're going to go into specific handling details that that you can use or leave behind depending on how they affect the horse. But it's important for me to go over first what good posture is and what alignment is, so you can understand why it carries over so much. You can go to the next slide. So good posture, if you're my student, you've heard me say this a million times. Good posture is not a look, but the ability to change. And what I usually say is one straight step. So if you think about a cow horse is a great example of being able to go in any direction at any moment. So it's not just an appearance, it's not just a look, and it's not a shape, it's the ability to change. But specifically, some things to think about is that the horse can carry both sides of their neck equal in length. So in other words, the horse isn't contracted to one side. You know, it's kind of like us being right-handed or left-handed. You want a horse to be sort of ambidextrous, able to do the job that we need them to do equally throughout their body. We're looking for the absence of ropey, bulgy, or tight muscles in the neck or in the entire body. We want the top of the horse's body to appear longer than the bottom. We want all 4 feet somewhat equal in weight bearing. And we're looking for the back to be released and open. And I'll go over all these a little bit more specifically throughout the presentation here. You're looking for a spongy quality to the muscles, not hard. And you're looking for both shoulders and really both hips to be equal, as close as you can get to equal in muscular development. And this is the most important part here, an overall appearance of harmony and comfort. And the reason I always say that is because we tend to overanalyze all of these little details and forget to look at the whole picture, really. The whole picture is essentially that the horse is comfortable, is happy, right? That's what we're looking for here, is that the horse feels well. So you can go to the next slide. So when I talk about the top of the body being longer than the bottom, this is what I mean, is that the whole top line of the horse is what we call open. One way to think about it is that when the horse is in a functional posture, everything opens and spreads apart, kind of like if you're unfolding a tablecloth, it all opens and spreads apart, right? So the top line lengthens, meaning that the nose and the tail are farther away from each other. Whereas when the horse is in dysfunction or not in the best posture that they could be in, it's like that tablecloth kind of crumples into the center, or the hammock sort of drops down, right? When the horse is in a dysfunctional posture, everything sinks and shrinks. And so you would see a horse collapsed in the back, or the neck would be crooked to one side, or the hips would be rotated or something like that. And then when you look at this picture, a really important part to take in is that the horse's expression is generally pleasant. The tail is relaxed and soft. The eye is soft. The mouth is soft. We don't see teeth or the tongue sticking out. We don't see the whites of the eyes. We don't see ears and a grumpy expression. And this is just sort of a like baseline loose rein posture. We're not collecting the horse or doing anything really too difficult. This is a horse that overall can carry himself well, just walking around on a loose rein. And the harmonious appearance overall basically means when you look at this picture, it's pleasant to the eye because it doesn't cause you emotional distress, right? You're not looking at something that makes you wonder if that horse is in pain. You can go to the next slide. So when we look at the horse's neck, I'm going to talk a lot about the horse's neck, simply because it's where we tend to look at the most. It's where we're up close and personal too. So when we're leading the horse or grooming the horse or riding the horse, we don't often get a full body view because that's kind of where we are. And the reason I talk about the neck so much is because it gives you so much information about how the horse's body is doing. And so you can tell a lot about what the hind legs are doing by looking at the neck. And of course, the whole body is very important to take into consideration. But like I often say, the horse's neck will give you a very good idea of what the body is doing overall. So that's a really important thing to look at. Is when you look at the horse's neck should be free of contraction. And so one thing I often think about is that the horse's neck from the shoulder to the ear is as long as possible. And without going into anatomy too much to make it too complicated, I often imagine all of the cervical vertebrae inside of the horse's neck like a hose. And if you've ever seen a horse's skeleton, the cervical vertebrae kind of take a little S-curve swan dive down to the bottom of the neck. A lot of people think they're at the top of the neck. They're actually at the bottom. But I often imagine spreading that out, like unkinking a hose. So a horse who is functional has a nice lengthened neck, sort of like an unkinked hose. But a horse who's dysfunctional has a shorter neck that is usually kind of crunched into their chest and often rotated to one side. So when we're looking at an overall functionally moving horse, the neck will look long and it'll look soft, soft on the bottom, long on the top, and it won't have any big bumps, humps, or lumps in it. It's not going to have, scar tissued muscles. It's not going to have anything that, looks too hard to touch. Next slide, please. Alignment is super important when we come into things like behavior, posture, well-being. And I'll explain more throughout the course or throughout this webinar, but alignment is essentially the horse's spine in one line from nose to tail, meaning that the horse's neck is in front of the shoulders, which is in front of the ribs, which is in front of the hips, with the tail centered. And I often use the analogy of having the horse like a garden hose, meaning that the water starting from the hind end, we turn on the spigot, that's the hind end generating energy. That energy is free to travel through and forward the horse unimpeded. If we're out of alignment, then the hose can get kinks in it, and that energy basically gets trapped in certain places. And what happens then is the horse becomes more crooked and unpredictable. They can become less directable. Like it can feel like you need a power steering tune-up. It can feel like your horse is wandering randomly. It can also feel like you have to constantly prod the horse to keep going. That's energy being trapped and the horse is unable to produce forward motion freely. It can also look like over abundance of energy. It can look like really nervous or excited energy. And so a lot of the times when the horse is in a dysfunctional positioning, when they're out of alignment, they tend to rotate onto one side and they can get twisted in their whole body, and they can use that actually for leverage. So if you have horses that are rearing, bucking, bolting, and that sort of thing, those horses are never straight. They always rotate onto a shoulder and the neck for leverage. And that's one of the reasons why alignment is so important in our daily leading. And if we aren't careful, we can actually create those behavioral problems by pulling the horse out of alignment with our bodies and hands and equipment, which I will cover throughout this talk. Next slide. So one easy way to think about alignment too is like having a bicycle. A bicycle is pretty easy to get on and pedal with minimal effort if both wheels are rotating the same. That's what we're looking for is the hind legs and the front legs are basically going in the same direction at the same rate. That's what makes the bicycle very easy to pedal forward. Now, when I was a little girl, I had a bicycle that had all kinds of mechanical issues that I wouldn't even know what they are. But one wheel would often turn to the opposite direction of the hind wheel. And then the handlebars would spin around and face me. And the front wheel would always lodge into the ground. The hind wheel would come up and I would basically get bucked off the bicycle. And the reason that happened is because both wheels started going in different directions. And that made the energy of the bicycle very impossible to direct. And so I would be steering as hard as I could, but the bicycle had a mind of its own, right? So if you think about the mechanics of riding a horse, how often have we been on a horse that feels like the front end and hind end are going in different directions, or the steering just feels impossible? You keep veering the horse back onto the line you put them on, but they keep veering off that line, right? That is a bicycle with wheels going in different directions. Now, the thing that I always tell people to think about is if you got on that bicycle, you would not muscle the bicycle harder. You wouldn't be whipping and pulling on the bicycle. You would send the bicycle to a mechanic to fix. But when we get on horses who are crooked or out of alignment or struggling with different amounts of weight load on different ends of the body, we tend to override them. We put more rein, more leg, and we hope that those will fix it instead of taking the bicycle to a quote unquote mechanic, which is essentially getting the horse into a better alignment with more freedom through their body. Next slide. The big difference between a bicycle and a horse is that, and I think this is the main reason why we keep trying the same stuff over and over, even though it never seems to get fixed, is that the bicycle will not compensate for you. So my bicycle, when I was a little girl, basically bucked me off, and there was no argument. It just did what this picture is showing, where the front wheel locks up, the hind wheel comes up, and off I went, right? But a horse has a desire to survive and is a moving, living, breathing thing. And so when the horse gets very crooked and the horse really struggles, the the horse is going to compensate so it doesn't fall down. And so instead of locking up and falling over and collapsing, because once the rider is off the bike falls down, right? But if a horse doesn't want to fall down, they go through the process of creating compensatory tension patterns, meaning they will lock up certain parts of their body more and put more weight into certain parts of their body more so that they don't fall down. And so, despite our poor handling or poor riding, sometimes the horse can still get it done because they're trying to survive. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we often don't even realize what the problem is, because the horse will get along pretty well as best they can. Next slide. So, if you want to ride well, you have to handle well. And the thing here that's so important to understand is that a horse is always learning. From the minute we go out into the pasture with the halter on, they are developing associations and postural patterns according to the way that we're doing stuff. And so it's not possible for the horse to be handled sloppily and crooked all the way up to the arena. And then we get on and we hope that they start getting straight at that point. Because what's happening is the horse is developing associative postures with our body and our aids. And so, as a rehab trainer, the majority of the work that I do is actually tidying up the work I do on the ground. And it's tidying up the way the horse associates the tack and me, associates with the tack and me. So when I go out to the field with my halter, I'm already training. When I'm putting the horse's head in the halter, I'm teaching them how to be straight. And from the first halter all the way up, by the time I get into the saddle, the horse is already thinking about straightness, and it's already easier for them to be straight. And so what's really important to understand that if you're looking to develop muscle tone, muscles are built through resistance and repetition. And so we need to pay attention to what we add resistance to and what habits we are repeating. And this is something that I work on with a lot of students, or in my courses when we're working on creating straightness through the courses, is that every little detail matters. And so if you are repeatedly handling the horse without attention, they don't just straighten right up when you're ready to get them straight, right? Every little moment matters, and you're developing postural patterns moment to moment. Next slide. Muscle memory is what we're going to get here. And that's what we're hoping to capitalize on for good and not for bad, ideally. So that's where the halter comes in, and the leading and all of that stuff, the way that we handle the horses on the ground. That's why we're looking to do such a good and mindful job of all those things, because you're creating muscle memory. Because if you want to ride a very light horse who is well balanced by themselves and doesn't need you to micromanage every detail, that horse needs to be able to carry themselves. And if you have ever worked out or done yoga or done Pilates or whatever, something along those lines, you probably know how hard it is to get into muscle memory, because on our day-to-day lives, we walk around however we want. So let's say you have an office job, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and you carry yourself slumped over at the desk. And then you go to your yoga class on Saturday morning, and your yoga is telling you to spread open your body and to be more flexible and to have better mobility. It's pretty hard to counteract the muscle memory from your 9 to 5 to your sudden yoga posture. And so what we're trying to do with the horses is keep everything pretty similar. And so by the time you're getting in the saddle and by the time you're advancing through the levels or whatever it is you want to do, your horse carries the muscle memory, and they then have the muscular tone to carry the postures that we desire to ride. Next slide. So this picture of the last picture that I had was a young filly that I started under saddle. And so the picture before was just me leading her, and now she's wearing the saddle and I'm lunging her. She's got the same posture, and you can go to the next slide. and you'll see that the posture she carries under the first ride, this was her first ride ever, is pretty similar, right? So it wasn't suddenly she turned into a wet noodle and didn't know how to move. She already knew how to move, and this is a very green posture, so I'm not saying she's collected or round or on the bit or anything like that. This is a 3-year-old horse carrying me for the first time, in a similar posture to the ones that I had been working her in. So by the time she had to carry my weight and start to move around, being ridden, there was nothing new for her to really learn at that point, except for how to do it with me on her. So I'm capitalizing on the muscle memory and their positionings together on the ground. Next slide. So again, muscle is built through resistance and repetition. So when we're handling the horse, we always have to remember that something is getting stronger and something is getting weaker. And that's something I work on a lot in my courses, is teaching people how to handle the horse with respect to developing good muscle tone, right? So if you want the horse to be soft in the bridle, you want them to be soft to the leg, then they can't be super strong in those areas, right? So if we are perpetually riding, if we're perpetually handling a horse where we are putting too much resistance into the line, for example, this comes up in my courses all the time, is the horse pulls on the line, right? They're using the line like a weight to resist, right? They're using it for leverage. They're using it for support. They're using it as what my teacher would call it, the fifth leg. It's basically what they're balancing on. And so if we put too much tension on the head, look at in this picture, what's getting stronger? What's getting stronger in this picture is the neck and the shoulders, not the hind legs, because that's where all the resistance is. And so we have to really be smart when we're training, work smarter, not harder, right? That's what I'm always trying to teach my students is use your interactions to work smarter so that you don't have to fix so much or work so hard when you're under saddle. Next slide. So now I'm going to go into the specific pieces of handling. So actual specific things that you can do. So generally when we go to the horse, the first thing that we have to do is put the halter on. So when you're putting the halter on, this is where a lot of people tend to kind of zone out and just get the task done. And tidying up haltering is very, very important in my program because it teaches the horse how to relate to your body, to your reins, to your legs, and basically to the rest of the encounter together. So when we're putting the halter on, we're teaching them everything they need to know about us and our equipment. So we're basically teaching the horse everything that there is to know from here on out, right? I always think of the lead rope as my reins, my body is the leg, and I'm teaching the horse at this point how to be centered and calm. Next slide. Halter fit is something that I'm very particular about, and there are good reasons here. The quality of the halter and the fit is going to change a lot the messages conveyed. And I'm not a proponent of one type of halter over the other as long as it fits and is comfortable with the horse. But there are certainly certain feelings that are easier to convey the message with refinement and with respect to the horse's head and neck, which are very sensitive structures. And one thing I talk about a lot with my students, or anybody who works with me regularly, is I talk all the time about all of the computer systems, a command control center. That's what we're talking to every single day. You're putting a horse's halter on their head where their brain is. There's a huge nerve bundles. There's the tongue and the hyoid connection. There is the spinal cord. That's just a huge cross section of very important informational pieces. And I don't think any one of us would ever tolerate having our heads and necks pulled on to the degree that horses do. And so in order for horses to protect their well-being and their safety, their comfort, and all of those very important structures, when they get rude handling or not ideal handling, they tend to tension their neck muscles in self-protection, similar to how you might in a car accident when you get whiplash. If you get whiplash, those as your neck muscles and your back muscles tensioning to protect all of those sensitive structures in your head and your neck, right? And so horses are being pulled on over by the head and neck pretty much every single day all over the place, right? And so what happens when we are not using awareness to how the material fits and to how we handle it, what happens then is they start to tension the neck muscles and the muscles in the face and jaw as well. And so what it feels like to us is resistance, stubbornness, lack of energy, tension, all kinds of feelings that we don't like, that we can often look at as a training issue, can often simply be the body in self-protection mode from poor fit or poor handling. Next slide. So a too big halter is probably the most common fit mistake that I see. If you've got a halter that's sliding around the head. So first we'll talk about how that halter itself is interacting with the structures of the face. So in both these pictures, you have a halter that is hanging down over the nostrils, which is very sensitive tissue. You have a lot of nerve endings, and then also on the base of the skull, I'm sorry, the bottom toward the nostrils of the skull, the nasal bone gets very, very fragile, and it's very easy to actually break. So you have nasal bone leading into cartilage. You've got a lot of nerves there. You've got a lot of soft structures. And so if the halter is hanging down too low, then the pressure we apply to the halter is going to go down onto those structures, which is going to easily create a horse's resistance, either through pain or fear of pain. And they can do things like toss their head, tuck their head back too low, jerk their head to the side, and those kinds of things. The other thing that happens is the message on the rope doesn't really go to the right places. So if the halter is too big, the messaging is like a telephone wire, right? The electricity coming up a telephone wire. It's not going to a specific place in a clean and easy to understand way. It's actually being dispersed all over the place because that halter is sliding around so much that the information tends to be just kind of a big mess. And so simply by changing the halter fit, you can actually give the horse clearer signals to understand and make lighter responses because the messaging doesn't have to travel through such a mess, right? And it doesn't matter if you're using a rope halter or a web halter, you've got a lot of banging around and sliding and buckles and knots and things like that that can be very uncomfortable. Go to the next slide. Too small, I don't see it as often, but it does happen. Too small is going to make it very hard to relieve pressure. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to put excess pressure on facial nerves and things like that. And it's going to make it hard to make signaling clear because the signaling can't come on or off easily. It's kind of like wearing a belt that's too tight, it's going to make it pretty hard to be comfortable. Next slide. So what is the ideal fit? The ideal fit allows for subtle messaging to go through. So that doesn't put excess pressure on the pole and the nose. We don't want the halter to be sliding around, and we don't want it to be twisting the horse's head or anything like that. And ideally, the material would be comfortable on the horse's face. So both of these photos show a good fit. I like to not have a whole lot of, I don't want to fit a whole hand in the halter, but I do like to be able to fit some fingers in there and to have it have room to not be putting pressure on the horse's face just by being there, but that pressure can come on and off with ease as you mean it to. Next slide. So the haltering method here we'll talk about. You can go to the next slide. So a very common thing that I see a lot is when people present the halter by bringing it up the horse's chin and kind of throwing the top of the halter over. Now, again, going back to the bicycle analogy, a lot of horses will tolerate it. Some won't, many will. But just because a horse tolerates it doesn't mean it's ideal for the horse or the best presentation, right? So when we bring the halter up to the horse's chin, one of the first things that can happen, for one, you're in kind of a dangerous position right underneath the horse's body, right? So when we bring the halter up to the chin, the horse is going to possibly elevate their head. And then we have all these buckles and stuff in their eyes. And then when you flip the thing over, there's that anticipation of that the top of the halter flipping over that can create a raising of the head and a tensioning of the head. Now you might say it's not such a big deal because we're getting the thing done and the horse is holding still, but think of where all these things lead to, because the next thing you want to do is put a saddle on, a bridle on, and go ride, right? And we don't typically want to ride a horse who is in the process of elevating their head away from pressure, right? Because your halter coming up toward their nose is pressure, and they are then resisting that pressure by elevating their head. We want a horse that softens to the aids, that feels lovely and with us and content and happy in the process of what we're doing. And so This is not an ideal way to go about creating that. Next slide. So when we halter the horse, I want to think about the haltering process being just like bridling. Or what does it feel like? What would I want my horse to feel like during riding, right? When I ride the horse, I want them to be between my right leg and left leg and my right rein and left rein. And so when I present the halter to the horse, I want the horse to be between the right side and left side of the halter and the top and the bottom. And depending on the horse that you have, ideally, I like the horse to relax their neck down, and they don't have to bring it all the way toward me like both of these horses are. But I like them to be centered in the halter, and I'm going to bring the halter to them carefully so they can slip their nose down into it. So instead of bringing it up, I'll actually offer the halter and let them put their nose into it. What this is going to help them do is to keep their neck relaxed, to keep their poll relaxed, and allow their jaw to stay soft, which is very important to a good riding horse. Next slide. And you can go to the next slide. We'll talk about leading. So, okay, we've already talked about the neck and how important it is to see the neck for what is happening in the rest of the body. When we're leading the horse, many people, I probably spend like the first whole day of a clinic working on this, is because many people accidentally lead the horse with a twist in the horse's neck. And what happens when we do that is the neck twists to the inside and the hips twist to the outside. And so in no time, you have a horse that's actually crowding you, swinging their neck around you, and the hips are out this way. So that horse becomes harder to control, and they're more likely to become emotionally dysregulated. The reason they become more emotionally dysregulated is because we have brought them out of balance, for one. So their legs are kind of all over the place. It's harder for them to control their legs and to get them organized in the way that they might need to. And if you've ever walked an anxious dog on the leash, you know that the dog is more anxious when they're on the leash because they're under our control and they can't really protect themselves as much as they want to, right? The same thing happens with a horse when we put the halter on, we lead them, especially like in a clinic situation. For example, I have 10 horses in a clinic and they're nervous about the other horses around them, right? So you already have a level of anxiety going. And then if they get crooked, then they start to feel out of control over their bodies. And then they disconnect from our aids more and more because we're out of position to be able to help them. So the messaging of the lead line is then less possible to go through the horse's body and translate all the way to the horse's hind legs to make them more balanced, because we kind of have a plane crashing into the ground, right? So the controls at that point are harder to make the plane come back up just because we're so far already down. So the more crooked the horse gets, the less control we have over their legs and the less control the horse actually has over their own legs. And so when we're leading the horse, to be very careful to preserve the length of the neck, meaning from the shoulder to the tip of the ear, right behind the ear. I want to see the horse's neck as long as possible and as centered between the two front legs as possible. Next slide. So good technique makes a huge difference in your horse's well-being. Oftentimes when I have a troubled horse come into training, they will dive down on the lead line, or they'll want to pull against it, or they'll dive away from me, or they'll come up and rear, or all kinds of stuff, right? And one of the first things I work on with those horses is getting them in alignment and leading straight. And that makes such an enormous difference for their well-being because they start to get in control of their bodies, they start to regulate their breathing, and then the messages that I give them are going to be given in real time instead of delayed or too loud or too soft or too whatever. Because the farther apart we get, the more distorted our aids are received by the horse. It's kind of like the telephone game, right? The closer you are together, the more obvious the aid is and the more soft you can give it. But the more far apart you start to get, the harder it is for the aid to become clearly understood. So if you have a horse that rushes ahead of you and they're crooked like this, you're going to have to do a lot more on that lead line to straighten them out and slow them down than if you were right here and they were straight. So getting the horse in a good alignment and getting the horse's neck in the center is probably the first and most important priority I have when I'm working with the horse after I've put the halter on, because from there, I'm going to be able to talk to his entire body. So again, I want the horse to have a little bit of a belly in the lead line. I don't want to be pulling on the rope. I don't want to have absolutely no communication either. So it can't be so long that it's flopping around. But I want to have a soft centered lead line, meaning the lead line is not to the left or to the right of the horse's chin, but it's kind of centered. And I want to have the horse parallel to me. And I'll talk about leading positions later. But basically, I want the horse in alignment and responsive to my lead line and to my body positioning. Next slide. And we'll talk about some common mistakes here in leading. Go to the next slide. These are things I see probably every single day, and I see them in upper level training barns. I see them in amateurs. I see them all over the place. And I think that a lot of them are so normalized that people think of them as correct just because you see them every day, right? The first one is the horse being pulled forward. And you can see in this picture, this horse has raised his neck in resistance. He's elevated his head. But what's actually happening to the legs here is he's dropped his back and all the legs are basically backward. And so it's probably the most common tendency in the world when the horse is going slow for the person to try and pull them along more to speed them up, right? But that actually makes the opposite happen. If you've ever felt a horse being pulled, they always go backward into the pressure, right? So it's one of those things where we try the same thing with the same result and we don't think outside of the box. But when we pull forward, we brace the neck and the jaw and the pull. And from there, we've kind of thrown out the rest of the horse's body because everything from there is locked in opposition backward. If we are in the habit of doing this, we're creating a perpetual pattern of tension in the horse's body where the horse braces their neck, locks their shoulders, and basically becomes unable to go forward from there because they're so locked up, they turn into concrete that from there, it would be pretty hard to get them forward even without pulling on them anymore. Next slide. Pulling backwards. This happens more when horses are more excitable and more nervous and more forward. So you can see that this horse's neck has twisted to the inside and the handler is attempting to control the horse by pulling backward. So this kind of creates the opposite. It's the pulling a dog backwards sort of thing. When you take a dog out and he wants to meet another dog and you start to pull that backward, what does the dog do? They lean into the leash and pull away from you. And so you're kind of getting the opposite end of the slingshot. The horse is then going to become quicker. They're actually going to become more fast. They're going to brace into the lead line and they're going to tension their neck against the lead line and they're going to become more crooked. This happens every time I see somebody pulling backward on the horse, and the horse goes faster, more crooked. And so what actually happens, which is almost worse than the postural patterns that come up here, the thing that we actually accidentally teach the horse is that pulling means speed up. And that becomes very dangerous when we get on their backs to ride, because when we have a need for the brakes, we don't have them, right? And this is a perfect scenario of how everything really matters, because the way that we're handling the horse on the ground is teaching them everything, whether we mean to or not, about how to respond to our reins, because that pressure on the head, if it habitually means go faster or in resistance of, going to be a lot harder to use subtle, refined, and soft aids when riding that kind of a horse. Go next slide. Pulling sideways is another common mistake. And what it does is it creates a crookedness in the base of the neck along with the head. And you can see in this picture, this man is pulling the horse toward him, but the horse's head is actually going the opposite way. The most dangerous part of this is that while the head is going to the right, the horse's shoulders are going to the left, which means that if this horse spooks at something, he's going right over top of this man. So we are creating a very strong neck and shoulders in this way of handling. And we're also creating a horse that we really can't control, because when this horse becomes hypervigilant, which they always will if they have their head and neck handled with this much restriction, they'll get hypervigilant. And it's probably one of the most common things that I've seen off the track horses do is they look to the outside and drop their shoulder towards you. And it becomes very dangerous, because then it's really hard to get that horse off of you and away from you. And the first place they go when they're upset is on top of you. Next. Pulling down, I see a lot of people correct a horse that way with a quick jerk downward. So where that tension goes is straight to the pole. So when you have a downward pull on the lead line, it goes right to the pole of the horse. They elevate their head in self-protection, right? And what it does is it drops the back and it makes the horse much more disconnected and much more braced. So if we're looking to create a horse that is soft through the body, the downward pull is not a good way to get that done. Next slide. So people always ask me, what is the position my horse should be in while leading? Well, it really depends. There's more than one way to skin a cat, to use a bad expression, but it really depends on what you do with the horse, what you need the horse to do, and the situation. Because there's going to be a time where you want the horse to walk right next to you, but you also might need the horse to send ahead of you in a trailer, or you also might need the horse to go directly behind you on a trail ride. And so what I like to teach people is not a positioning to memorize, but the ability to communicate, because there's going to be a time where you have to break the rules to get something done, right? So your horse might need to lead beside you, ahead of you, behind you, in front of you, all kinds of stuff, right? Next slide. So here are some options. Of course, it's not the only one. But if you're leading beside the head, you're parallel to each other. This is probably the most normal one. You want to do it on both sides of the horse to help make equal ability for the horse, not just visually. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that when you get on the right side of your horse, they tend to have more trouble because they're not used to seeing you on that side. So with not being used to seeing you on that side comes a postural change. They might want to twist their body to get you back on the left eye where they're more comfortable. So they're going to be more crooked, maybe more resistant on the right side, right? And when you ride your horse, you probably notice that there's a side that they're a little bit more stiff on and a side that's a little bit easier. So we can help clean that up a lot by leading on both sides, because the horse then becomes accustomed to moving their body equally on both sides. And you can liken it to learning to write with both hands. It's pretty hard to change your dominant hand, but if you work at it a little at a time, it gets a little bit easier. So we need to keep straightness in mind when we're leading. So we want the horse's neck in the center of the chest with the ribs right behind it and the hips right behind it. So you can see that this horse has a slight flexion over to the right, but her whole neck hasn't swung over, just really her skull. So we don't want to pull the whole neck over when we have a little feel on the lead line. In other words, you don't want the horse's whole body to become distorted just because you've picked up the lead line. All right, next slide. Another thing I often do is lead from the shoulder. And now this is probably one of the most common positions I take when I'm teaching people while they're riding, where I'm actually taking control over their horse, but I'm doing it next to the rider's body. And you might do this in hand work. You might do this if you need the horse to go ahead of you a little bit. There's lots of reasons you might want to do this one. But the same principle applies. You are leading the horse straight. They're following the lead line. They're parallel to your body. But instead of leading the line next to them and forward, you're kind of pushing the line forward so that you don't make them crooked. So from this position, it's really easy to accidentally pull the horse toward you. And getting on from a mounting block is a perfect example. You get on the block and you lead the horse to you, but when the horse passes your body, you have to let a little bit of line forward to let the horse stay straight, because if you keep your hand close to you, they'll turn their head into you and they'll spin their hips away, and then they're not straight on the block anymore. So that's actually a pretty easy example to understand, because most people have had to lead a horse up to a mounting block and found that it's hard to get them to stay straight. Much of that is handling error, because we're accidentally pulling the horse's head in off the line of travel that the body was, and the whole body kind of slingshotted around it. So if you're leading from the shoulder, you want that same straightness, but you're just sending the energy more forward. Next slide. And then if you're leading from behind, it would be exactly the same. I'm just sending energy down the lead line to her head. So we're parallel. The feel on the lead rope is the same, but it's just being offered from a different positioning. And this is a trickier position to lead from, because it's very easy to cause the horse to swing around and look at you. And so this is all change in feeling with the same principles in mind. Next slide. So tying is another place. You can go to the next slide. Tying is another place that a lot of pastoral patterns are developed, because many people tie their horses every day to get tacked up, to get ready, to be handled in whatever way. when we're tying the horse, we should be thinking about straightness and alignment too. And I should say that tying well for the horse requires a lot of preparation to ensure success. So it's not something that you would just do and hope for the best. It's like learning to drive. You don't just get in a car and go down the highway. You learn how to handle the steering wheel, and you learn what the pedals do, and you learn what the rules of engagement are. So by the time you get to the highway, hopefully you don't just freak out and crash. Next slide. And you can go to the next slide. One of the most common mistakes that I see is people tying too short. So if we tie the horse too short, they actually are unable to release the brace in their neck because they're always in resistance of the line. And so again, muscles built through resistance and repetition. If the horse is tied too short, they're not going to be able to relax their neck. It's kind of like being held into one position. Your neck is going to get really tight. So if the horse can't relax their head in a neutral position, the line is too short. Next slide. Tying too low is probably the most common mistake that I see from usually people who are really well-meaning and trying not to tie their horse too tight. When we tie too low, it's very easy for the horse to get a foot over the top of the line. It can actually make it hard for them to be straight or to know where they're supposed to be because there's so much wiggle room that they can kind of flounder around. And there's a much higher chance of injuries because they actually can get much more leverage on their neck and pull and all of these delicate structures. So if the horse is going to pull back, there's a lot more leverage from down low that they can run into. Go into the next slide. I'm not a fan of cross tying, and this one is kind of controversial, but I'll explain why. When we cross tie, first we limit the horse's ability to put their neck into a neutral position. So most of the time we're cross tying, the horse kind of has to elevate their head. And the second thing that happens is they're unable to turn their head side to side to see what's around them without running into one of the lines. The third thing that happens is you have pressure on both sides of the head that doesn't get relieved. Now, it's not a huge deal for most horses most of the time because many horses cross tie every day and do just fine. They don't panic and they're still. However, what we're creating is what we see in the picture in this horse is the bottom of the neck is very braced. The horse's head is elevated to a degree that is not a comfortable neutral position. And we're teaching them that pressure on the head is meaningless and does not go away. Where that backfires is when you get on the horse to ride and you have pressure in the reins that then you hope that they will interpret as something meaningful. And so again, this comes back to what do you want the horse to be learning? And so for me, if they can cross tie with two lines, they can tie just fine with one. And so it's mostly unnecessary to me. If you can keep your horse still and they're well educated, then the cross ties are unnecessary. You can go to the next slide. When you don't give enough education to the horse, pullbacks become a problem. It's probably one of the more common problems that I'm called to help with is horses that have learned to pull back against the pressure of the line. This usually starts from poor preparation or some event that startled them, but it's pretty unnecessary. And once it's happening, it requires a lot of thought and preparation to tidy up. And for many horses, you're dealing with a management situation and setting it up so that pulling back is not possible. It's not something I would try to set them up for and watch them fail. Because again, there's a lot of important structures in that area. Oh, as well as horses that pull back are going to really struggle to maintain a steady rhythm. They tend to zoom forward and fly back. They have trouble understanding the aids, and they tend to be very rigid through the neck and the back. Next slide. When we tie correctly, we're looking for an adequate length of rope where the horse can relax his head without getting it too far down. So if they get it too far down, again, they can get a foot over the lead line, they can get crooked, they can get hung up, they can get into a lot of trouble. I like to tie from higher. Now, this photo I just chose because it showed a good length of line in a relaxed horse. I'm not advocating at all for patience pulls or anything like that. I know that tying can be very controversial, but if you're going to tie, it should be from higher up to keep the leverage on the horse's neck and head reduced. And it should be at a length that is safe, but long enough to keep the head relaxed. And you can go to the next. And then we'll talk about saddling. And you can go to the next. Common mistakes are visible all over the world. So depending on the discipline that you come from, the part of the country that you come from, and the cultural beliefs surrounding saddling, there's going to be different things that you're going to see. And I've had my foot in both English and the Western worlds for all of my life, and so I've seen different points of views proposed. And so there's just some things that I like to keep in mind, regardless of discipline. Is the method that you present the saddle kind of makes or breaks the way that the horse feels about it for life. Now, I've started quite a few colts, and it's something that I have learned through trial and error, and some of the things you learn a little too late, right? And some of the things you catch on for the next horse to do better. But I have found that the first saddle makes a huge difference in the ongoing habits the horse has for being saddled. The reason I bring that up is because a lot of my students have trouble with their horse pinning their ears or dancing around or being kind of cold backed or having trouble with the saddle and the girthing process, even if their technique is good. The reason I bring that up is because a lot of times the first saddling leaves its mark. So if you're in the habit or in the work of starting young horses, it's something to consider, that the way that you put that first saddle down, the way the horse moves off from that first saddling is setting them up for a lifetime. And the way that we used to do it back when I was younger is you just plop the saddle on and watch the horse muck around with it for a little bit until they stopped. But what I'm finding now is that the horse has not, even if they don't buck anymore, they have physically become in the habit of tightening up their rib muscles, their back muscles, and so they will struggle to loosen their back and to breathe well and to be relaxed in our work, just because the saddle has caused them to associate that with tensioning those areas. Next slide. So if you throw the saddle down too hard and without really thinking about what you're doing, especially in the Western world, this is really common because those saddles are really heavy. And so if you plop that saddle down on a back that is not prepared, and your technique is poor, the horse is, of course, going to drop their back. You know, it's kind of like if you get hit in the stomach with a bag of bricks, you're going to tighten your stomach, right? So if the horse is as a saddle that's being put down too hard, like you see in this picture, this horse here is bracing his neck and back in anticipation of the saddle. And you can go to the next slide. Cinching too fast or rudely is probably one of the most common things I've seen worldwide. Horses who are being punished for girthy behavior, for nipping and biting during girthing, are anticipating some kind of discomfort or unpleasurable sensation. And so it's kind of a rock and a hard place for the horse, because they're trying to tell us that the methodology here is not very comfortable, but they're being punished for showing it. And so what happens is just this big storm of cranky feelings around cinching. So if you have a horse that is cinchy and your technique is not creating that, you kind of have to know that you have some very grumpy muscles in that area. And one of the things I like to recommend to people to help fix that is to start incorporating body work into the saddling process. I think Mary DeBono actually has some really beautiful work about that, and she's well worth checking out. Her name is Mary DeBono. But you can just take a little bit more time in the process. You can make sure you're cinching softly, but changing the sensory feeling when you're going to cinch up on a horse that has had rude cinching habits done to them is really, really helpful, because you're changing the loop that the horse is on. It's also well worth investigating ulcers, saddle fit, girth fit, and all that sort of thing. But if we cinch too fast, or we're cinching rudely, and rudely, I don't mean that you're intending to be rude, I mean that it feels rude to the horse. If our cinching technique is pinching the horse's skin or causing them to brace their muscles, then they're going to have a negative reaction and long-term association with that. You can go to the next slide. So when you put the saddle down, you want to place it down smoothly. And I ride Western and English. So I have one saddle that weighs about 55 pounds, another one that weighs about 25 pounds. And so the technique here is tricky, because it's hard to fling a big saddle around. I think I have a YouTube video somewhere on how to put a saddle on with control, one of those big Western saddles. It's really all on the technique. But if you need a stepping stool to put it on carefully, use whatever you need to do that, so that your horse is not bracing their back just to get the saddle on. So I like to make sure that the horse's back is relaxed, and then I softly place the saddle down. That's going to make a big difference to how they feel about the girthing. And it's going to make a big difference into how they ride because we haven't tightened all those muscles up. You can go to the next slide. When I cinch up, I try to do it a little at a time, and I try to do it very smoothly. And this is one of the things that I show in depth in one of my courses. I think it's called Posture and Daily Handling 2. That's the second one. I show how this process can be done. Cinching up just a little bit at a time so that it's not one big pinch, because we don't want to aggravate these muscles. Because if you want the horse to be responsive to your leg and you want them to bend around your leg and all that sort of thing, we can't antagonize the muscles that have to do that work. Again, it's back to being punched in the stomach. It's pretty hard to be limber and to dance well if you're always in a contractive pattern. You can go to the next slide. Promoting symmetry. I've stopped using the word symmetry actually since I made this PowerPoint. I now just talk about being ambidextrous because symmetry is not really natural. Nobody's body is actually symmetrical. No bones are not symmetrical. Symmetry is not really the right way to think about it. Would rather think about it like ambidextrous ability. And the reason I say that is because even if your body is not symmetrical, you can use both sides equally through practice. So my right hand is my favorite hand, but I can use my left hand if I have to. But the muscling in both my arms is very different, right? So I don't have a symmetrical body, but I can work toward being ambidextrous. And I think that's a healthier way to look at it. But when we're talking about leading a horse, developing ambidextrousness, we want both hind legs to be equal in weight bearing ability, right? We want to develop a horse who can carry weight to the hindquarters. So that means the right hind and the left hind should be about as strong, right? Or about as able to work, right? And so to support that, we can lead from both sides. We can halter from both sides. We can saddle from both sides. You can even bridle from both sides. And one of the things I actually find a lot is that horses who have trouble with any of these experiences, you can actually start over fresh on the offside because not many people halter from the right side or bridle from the right side. And so if the horse is resistant on the left, often I pop over to the right and it's like a whole new experience because the horse isn't in any kind of a resistance pattern over there. So sometimes you can help balance things out by going to the other side. But quite often we forget all about the right side until we're traveling to the right under saddle and we're hoping that that horse will bend. Because the horse is going to have, most of us are going to lead from the left and the horse is going to be crooked falling into the left. And every single day we're leading in that pattern, the horse is developing postural habits and muscular tone to support a crooked pattern. So if we spread things out onto both sides, it can make a huge difference. Next slide. Promoting alignment is super important. I like to teach the horse to lead parallel. I like to have them moving with their hips behind their shoulders. It's very important to use the lead rope in a way that doesn't overbend the neck laterally or vertically. In other words, you don't want the horse curling their neck up to avoid the line and bearing down. You've all felt that feeling probably. And you don't want the horse sticking their head up in the air and running off with you, but you don't want to accidentally overbend the horse's neck towards you. And we want to handle in a way that is smooth, not being sneaky or tiptoeing around the horse, but you want to handle smoothly as if you were handling your partner in a dance so that we don't brace these muscles up. Next slide. Trailer loading basically has all of the same principles of everything else. And if you know me, you know that trailer loading to me is simply the test, the final result of all the good handling. I have a little rescue horse with me right now that I have been gentling. He has absolutely no handling before he's come to me. To get him on the trailer to come to me, I just kind of moved him through a chute like a cow because he couldn't have a halter on. And what I worked on when he was here was teaching him how to get caught, how to put his head into the halter, teaching him how to pick up his feet and to lead and all those little basic things. And last week, I just hooked my trailer up and walked him right into the trailer and walked out. And that was the first time that I'd ever put him in the trailer. Now, why did he go into the trailer? Because he knew how to lead. He knew how to lead straight. He knew how to follow the line, and he knew how to back out straight. And so all of the skills that he used to go into the trailer, he learned outside of the trailer, and the trailer was just the test. And because we didn't make it a big to-do, he just walked in and walked out. And that is what I usually do with horses who have trailer loading trouble is we don't fix it at the trailer. We fix the leading, the haltering, and everything else. And by the time the horse's body and mind and lead rope are all kind of in the same place, the trailer, unless there has been some sort of trauma in the trailer or there's something wrong with the trailer or the driving that has scared the horse, generally the horse just gets right in the trailer. Next slide. So as you can see, all of these things that we do on a daily basis make a huge difference to how the horse's experience with us is. And I think it's really important to drive home that when we take the horse out of the pasture that they're in, we're taking their life into our hands. And they know that, even if we don't know that. So every moment that they're crooked or not supported well, or not sure what to do, or they don't have the skill set for what we're asking, that's kind of a ding against the relationship with us, not just for their body, but for how they feel with us, right? And so if we learn to become good leaders, that means anticipating the horse's needs. That means understanding how they feel about things. That means having the awareness to look at the environment and see what the horse needs to have done for them. And basically just handling them with care and respect to their body and their mind, meeting them in their world to help us kind of meet in the middle. And I think a horse is so generous that they will overcome a lot to be with us, even when we don't deserve it. So I think it's well worth meeting them halfway to really help us have a good connection and to help the horse get along in our world, because they weren't designed for our world, really. I don't think we give that enough credit, that they were really designed for their world, and we brought them into ours, and so it's on us to help them understand it. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm sure you guys have some questions. Let me go to the chat first real quick.
Yeah, there's some in the chat, Amy, and
Yeah.
but maybe before we start taking questions, I will post into the chat the link,
Okay.
or just explain what that is, or the other courses and the discount that these folks can get.
Oh yeah, that's their surprise. That's your special surprise. So I don't remember the specifics, Kevin. Can you talk about it?
Sure. Yeah, there's two courses that are ready now that directly relate to exactly what Amy just got done talking about, with some of the specific examples, how to halter, how to put the saddle on, and of course in the videos in the courses. But they are basically a pretty deep expansion of what this webinar is. So and there's two courses. There's what Amy calls Daily Handling 1 and Daily Handling 2. So the link that is going to be in the chat here in a second, you can go sign up for those. And there's a pretty steep discount because you were on the webinar. So you can sign up for one of the courses for a 30% discount, or you can sign up for both of the courses for a 40% discount. And that expires, it's on the website. It expires in 48 hours from when we're done here. So it'll just disappear. It's not like there's a discount code or anything. It'll just disappear after 48 hours. So that link will go in the chat right now. It will also more than likely be in an email that we'll send out with the recording of this. So if you don't get it in the chat, don't panic. You'll get an email that should have the link in it, but also, don't wait too long because it's only good for 48 hours from now.
Kevin, can you take the screen share off so I can see myself when I'm answering these questions?
Yep.
Because I'm going to use my little wooden horse here. Okay, so I'm going to pop your questions now. All right, so the first one is my mare has been grumpy at girthing up. I go quite slow. I added a probiotic and her grumpy went away. So ulcer is a possibility. I don't see a question in there, but that is a very good it's a very good thing to add, is that, I try not to talk outside of my expertise because I'm not a vet, I'm not a body worker or anything like that. Those things are super important. So if your horse is having perpetual trouble with something that popped out of nowhere, or or you just can't get it to go away, it's always worth checking into those things. Ulcers are really common. I think the statistics I read was 75 to 80% of domestic horses have or have had ulcers. So that's a huge percent. I think we really don't take that into full consideration. And then somebody else here says we do a full rub down for relaxation, tighten the girth in 3 or 4 steps. That's a great idea. Yeah. Um, Okay, so Mary's question is, can you talk about how to lead the hind end for lightness you're talking about online? I know how much you have taught us in courses, but I imagine folks might ask how to not pull forward, back, or down. Yeah, so I go over that in the daily handling and posture one, but basically what you're looking for is for the horse to be parallel to you, right? So here's your horse and here's you. And for a lot of us, we might be like smaller than the horse by far. Some really short people have some really tall horses and stuff like that. So that's going to change your positioning, which is why I don't like to teach one position, right? Because if you're 4'2" and your horse is 18 hands, it's not possible to always be side by side right at the head. You might not be able to walk fast enough to keep up with your horse, right? And so I think it's really important to learn to lead in a variety of positionings because your horse might get ahead of you, and it's really important to not accidentally pull them back on top of you. And that's something I work with my students a lot is you might just let some line slip and kind of push it forward, and you can walk parallel perfectly comfortable from this position, right? But you want the hind end to be connected basically to the lead line. And so what you need to do is not pull the horse onto the line where the hip swings out. Hopefully that answered that question. If there's anything else you want me to say about that, Mary, just pop it in the chat. The next question is, do you have a preference of using a rope halter or web halter for everyday handling? I really don't. I have both in my barn, and as long as it fits and is comfortable, I don't mind it. Well, if I'm using a rope halter, I like it to be really soft, and I like it to only have 2 knots and no clip. And the reason for that is that I don't want all this swinging around, and the clip can actually really speed up the swing, and it can make the messaging much more distorted. And it can also whack them under the jaw. I like the knots to be very soft, and I like the material of the halter to be soft. I don't really like a rigid rope halter. That's just my personal preference because I like the feeling of it, and I think it's more comfortable for the horse. Um, when I'm using a web halter, I like the same feeling. I like it to be soft. I like it to fit well. And I think one of the biggest problems for many people when they use web halters is they use web halters that fit all kind of crooked and crazy. It's sort of like your bra. You don't want a bra to be hanging off of you or it doesn't do anything, right? But it can't be too tight. It should basically be comfortable and held in position on its own. Next question is, what is the correct positioning for the knots on the rope halters? There's so much conflicting information. Yeah, if you look back at the pictures of the horses in the slide, that's basically where we like it. So if here's your horse's head, and then they've got this cheek right here, and then they've got like a bridge right here. The knots should be right underneath that bridge, so they're not pushing in. They shouldn't be on the bone, but they shouldn't be too low. So I usually say find the cheek groove and look for these little indentations. Kevin, if you can screen share again real quick and go back to the haltering part, I can show this picture if you're available.
Yeah, let me give me a second. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. But if you go to the slide that has the correct fit, then I'll show that picture again. And while I'm waiting, I'll answer another question here. Could I make a video of exactly how you like to halter? Yes, I believe there's one on YouTube. There should be a free one on YouTube, and I also go over that at length in the course. I also have a video on TikTok, I believe, as well of haltering. And I don't have the links offhand, but if you look on my TikTok and you look on my YouTube, there are videos of both of those things for free. All right, actually, you can go back to the tying or wherever. There's plenty of good halter pictures here. There you go. So if we zoom in on this guy, you can see that the knots of the halter are, oops, right underneath that little groove by the cheek. So you've got that little bone. The halter knot should not be on that bone, but just right beneath it. So that's a pretty comfortable place. The reason that's important is the knot below that underneath the chin that's kind of hanging down. That knot should not be hanging too low and it shouldn't be too close to the lips. Because if it's in the lips, it's going to bother the horse and it's going to be really annoying, right? So that puts it in a position to allow the whole halter to interact with the horse's face and body the way you want it to. Thanks, Kevin. That is great. Oh, and it looks like Mary put the video of in the chat of the haltering. So if you guys want to look at the chat, there's a YouTube link, thanks Mary, to the haltering video. So you can check out how I halter. Let's see, go back to the questions. All right, got to scroll all the way up. Okay, what can be done with a horse who habitually walks ahead of you? That's a really great question. I go over that in Daily Handling 1 as well. When you're leading the horse, depending on, again, a lot of it comes down to anatomical differences or energy differences, right? If you are a slow moving short person, but you have a high energy thoroughbred, they're often going to walk faster than you. So that's where learning to lead in different positions can be really, really helpful because it's not always entirely reasonable to ask the horse to slow down to meet your energy level, right? Sometimes it would be necessary and appropriate, but on a day-to-day basis, it wouldn't be easy for that horse to always tone down their energy to match us. But you can get along perfectly pleasant from two different directions, right? However, if you have a horse who's perpetually walking away from you, like there's a big difference between the horse walking faster than you because that's their normal pace versus them leaving you. And so a lot of it is just integrating together. So if you clean up the haltering, it starts to teach the horse how to think about being with you. That's one of the beginning parts of it. But from there, if the horse is always getting ahead of you and you pull the halter, it's really easy for the horse to just kind of do this. And a lot of people are sort of stuck in this kind of like plateau where the horse is neither with you nor against you, but you're just kind of slammed together, right? So what I tend to think about is if the horse starts to outwalk you, you can slip a little line and go a hair to the left, and then there's going to be a moment where you're together. That's when you can enact a little half halt on the lead line. Because if you do it from here, the horse is going to swing around and look at you, or they're just going to speed up. One thing I also really like to do is to put out ground poles or little cones to kind of weave together with to give the horse the experience of finding you. So you're not just walking and hoping that they'll stay with you on a straight line, but you're kind of saying, come with me a little this way, come with me a little this way. And then also sprinkling in moments where we ask them to slow down, ask them to speed up and make it more dynamic. Because a lot of us are just sort of in the habit of hoping the horse will come back to us and getting stuck in this like never ending cycle of one horse being faster than you and we can never get them to slow down. So it's really important to make leading a dynamic conversation and don't be afraid to use ground poles or cones or things like that to make it easy. And the last thing is to sort of set it up so that the horse is likely to be able to respond well. So if you think that they're going to slow down toward the gate, I'm not afraid to use that. If your horse is always out walking you, ask them to slow down a little at a time before you get to the gate, but then ask them to speed up where you think they're going to want to speed up and then start to change it up around the arena so that you can slow down somewhere else. So you basically pair in what you want the horse to do with the place that you think they can do it and then start to expand that in other places. But the thing here is to make it variable and to do a variety of different things. So it isn't just you and the horse in resistance of each other, but make it more dynamic. Let's see. I'm working with leading my horses. It's going while walking beside. How do I start with leading behind? That's a great question. So if you're walking beside, that's the first thing I usually teach the horses to walk beside, right? And if you want them to be able to lead from back here, a lot of times this is too big of a change and the horse will be like, well, where'd you go? And they'll spin around to face you, right? So what I often do is I'll be walking here and I'll get a little farther away, like I'm gonna lunge, but we'll stay here and then I'll come back. So you're starting to show the horse that we're still talking to each other in the same way, but from this position, because it's just a little bit different, but it's close enough. Then I might get a little bit farther back, but not too far back. So maybe right at the shoulder and let them stay. And then I might get back. So it's kind of like a little at a time, and then you go back to your more comfortable position. And then pretty soon you can go from here and ask them to go forward, and then from here, and then you meet back up. One of the most common mistakes that people make is they try to stay there for too long and they make it too abrupt. So you want it to basically just be for a moment and come back to neutral, making it really smooth so that they're following the feel of the lead line, not just your position, because you're going to need it to be variable in different moments. The other thing you can do to help is to start to set out ground poles. So when you're walking, you send the horse away toward the ground poles and then you meet back. And there might be a moment in there where you're kind of behind and you get back together. So use your environment creatively, use your gear creatively, and then use what the horse is offering and try to capitalize on that. Because if you've got a horse that might walk a little bit ahead of you, use that and teach them how to lead ahead of you on purpose. Let's see, is it acceptable to approach on the right side of the head or even from the front of the halter? Sometimes my Mustang has feelings about haltering from the left. I will continue to work on him putting his head in. Yeah, absolutely. You can and should be able to halter and approach on both sides. To your point about your Mustang having trouble with the left side, I have many horses that come in here that are so grumpy about the standard approach that they've received in their life that I almost always halter them from the right side for a little while because it's been so poisoned to them on the left that sometimes you have to shake up the feeling and the approach to make it different enough that the horse can latch onto it. Because even if your approach is really nice on the left side, but they've had bad experiences with that, you might just hop over to the right and make that feel good to the horse for a while and then build on it. But it's totally fine to go on the right side. I have a mare that I have been catching on the right side for a long time because she spent a lot of time being resentful of the way she was caught and handled on the left side. And she's happier that way. And I can catch her on the left side, but she prefers it on the right side. And so to me, it's just not a fight worth fighting. Let's see, when I went out to the pasture to halter my horse and bring him in, he sometimes would try to nip me. Um, I used the Pirelli rope halter in the way they. I wasn't sure if I was doing something wrong, if he was in pain at the head or pole, or if he was just telling me he didn't want to come with me. Yeah. So actually in daily handling too, so I made daily handling one where I talk about haltering and I had the horse drop their head and get soft in the halter and bring it toward me. And then one of my students asked me, what do I do when I bring my horse's head in and he tries to nip me? And so it dawned on me that there are some horses that you don't want them to bring their head in towards you because they're going to come and bite you, right? And so in daily handling too, I talk about what to do with that horse and how to actually position their nose almost in a counterbend and straight to help that horse be calm while you're haltering. So don't forget that you can be creative. There's no hard and fast rules here other than what works for your horse. And that goes for everything. You know, you have to find what works for your horse. So if the horse is showing displays of discomfort, right? Think outside the box. You know, not all behavior needs to be corrected, though, of course, I don't want anyone to get bit. Not all behavior needs to get corrected. Sometimes it needs to be accommodated, and not always. But there are times where the horse is saying, hey, there's something that I don't like about this process. And you just kind of have to experiment and think outside the box, try something a little bit different. And I've had so many nippy horses in training that I have started to realize that many of them will actually be happier if you counterbend them away while you halter. And a lot of that has to do with the way that people have been up in their face before maybe you had them. Some people are very rude to horses' faces or very over involved in them. And so sometimes your horse might be comfortable actually looking away. A Mustang is a great example of that because sometimes Mustangs are very sensitive to even just the pressure of you standing next to them. That when we try to make them look at us, it's kind of like telling a child to look at me while I'm yelling at you, right? It's too uncomfortable, and so they would rather look away. And so if you can make it be soft and comfortable for them over here instead of forcing them to look over here, I don't see anything wrong with that. So yeah, don't be afraid to experiment. Let me see if I can find the question where I was. Sorry. My horse dives when my grass dives when my mind is not two steps ahead of her. She just knows where the hole shot is. Yeah, some horses are really smart, and a lot of horses who have habits developed will require our attention to be on top of it. And I'm reminded of 10 years ago, I was in a clinic with Brent Graff, who's one of my mentors. And I brought him a horse that had all kinds of bad habits. And I told him that whenever I let my mind wander, the horse would start to pull backward and sort of drag behind me. And I asked him how to fix it. And he said, don't let your mind wander. And at the time, I was like, well, that's not really a solution. But now I'm coming to understand that is the only solution, that a horse is not a robot with buttons, that if we aren't there and attentive, we can't really blame the horse for being smarter than us, right? Is that they're going to do what works, and if it works, they're going to keep doing it, and they're going to keep looking for a way out. And so what I've realized is that a lot of correction on the horses is unnecessary because we're too late. We're after the fact, they've already done the thing. And so what we need to do is become more attentive, more aware, and prevent it in the first place, or better yet, give them the skill set to not do it. But it can be really tricky when the horse has already learned how to do it. They can be very quick, they can be very fast, and they might not be very subtle in their trying. Um, let's see what we've got next. Still trying to find a light but easy to hold line for in-hand work with a small clip. Do you have any brands you can suggest? For in-hand work, we're talking about a lunge line, not a lead line. I think that's what you mean. I like the cotton line, and I can't remember the brand. I have a 22-foot or more lunge line, and that is made of soft cotton. You can get it on Amazon. I'm struggling to remember the brand name, but I think if you go on Amazon and you just type in cotton lunge line, you should find plenty that work. A lunge line is one of those places that, it doesn't have to be more expensive to be good, and I think they're fairly inexpensive.
Hey, Amy,
Yes.
can I make a suggestion on lead line or on, I found a line, I don't know if you'd like it or not, but Keystone Equine, has this lunge line that I love. I use the cotton one, but my pasture is so full of crap that it picks up everything.
Oh yeah.
This
That
is
is
the
really annoying, yeah.
nicest line. I'll see if I can find the link to it.
Yeah.
I love it. I've been using it. I used it at the arena when, after you and I had those Zoom lessons with Elizabeth, but
Yeah.
I'm just so happy with it. I'm over the moon with it. So I'd love to share that with everyone.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead and do that. And
Okay.
and lead lines. So I will say that lead lines and lunge lines, just
I'm
like
sorry, it
anything
is a
else.
lunge. It is a lunge. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yes. But lead lines and lunge lines both, everybody's going to have they have a preferred feel. So
Yeah.
there's one of those things to think about is that there's an absolute yes and an absolute no, and then there's a gray area of what feels good in your hand and what does your horse like. And so that's where things get a little bit tricky to say, like, what's the best one. I know what I like. I love the tree line lead ropes when I'm leading. They're nice and heavy, but they're very smooth. I don't like the Tractor Supply really super light chintzy kind of a lead rope because they don't provide a good feel, right? So to me, that's a definite no, and the tree line is a definite yes. But then there's all the stuff in the middle of like what feels good in your hand and what does your horse respond well to, and that's going to be very different depending on what discipline you're in, what part of the country you're in. Some people like split reins that are leather. Some people can't stand them. I happen to love them. Does it make it right or wrong? No, unless your horse hates it and you can't figure out how to use it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see.
So
I see. Well, let me share it with you first, or I may just send you one.
Yeah,
Amy,
go ahead
as
and
a
share it to
gift,
everybody.
because-
Yeah, no, just
Yeah, because it is very light, but I took your lunging course, your beginning lunging course, and so my
Yeah.
horse doesn't really pull on me anymore. I can do a light, like you say, a half halt with it.
Yeah.
They're just they're fab. I love it. So I'll share it.
Yeah, share it with everybody.
Okay.
I'm sure they'd love to
Okay.
have a good resource because me saying I find it on Amazon and I can't remember the name is not super helpful. So
Right. Okay. Thanks, Amy. Good to hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Amy, can I just chime in on
Sure.
rope halters? The softest rope halter material is double braided nylon.
Mm.
So if you look for a rope halter, look for the material that's called double braided nylon. That's what I use. It's extremely soft. It's very gentle.
Yeah, good one.
So I share that one. Okay.
Yeah, the next question is, what do you think of putting the lead rope under the top of the noseband as a cheaper version of a nose ring? Yeah, that works fine. I often will just take the lead line through the front of the noseband when I'm working with my horses if I don't have handy a cavesson and a lead line. So there's a lot of these things where having more gear and more expensive gear isn't always going to give you a better feel. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. There's a lot of problems that can be solved with just a little creativity. So that's one thing I love about working with horses is it's not always about having perfect gear. It's more about your technique and the feeling you put into them. Let's see, I put a feel on the lead rope to move forward and that works, but sometimes my mare's mind leaves and she will stop. Ideally, I catch that before she leaves, but if she stops, to get her to move forward again without continuously pulling, what do you suggest? I know I need to get her attention back to me in order for her to listen to the feel to move forward, just not sure how to do that in a way that is effective. Yeah, that's really common, actually. And one thing that I think is really important to understand is that even if your technique is perfect, the horse is not always going to respond perfectly because you have you and you have the horse. You have two sides of the equation, right? And so it's something that I always talk about with my students is just not pulling is not always enough. It's a great start. Not pulling is awesome. And congratulations for not pulling. But you also need to help the horse understand what you mean. And so sometimes the horse is going to mess up and do something wrong. And so that's where we have to step in and help the horse understand what we're asking. And so what I often think about is that you're driving, like your flag or the tail of your lead line or clicking, kissing, anything that's driving the horse is there to support helping the horse find you or find the lead rope. And so if the horse is not looking for the lead rope because their attention is off or they've stopped, then you use your driving supporting aids to come back to the lead line. So you have on the ground, you have your body and your lead line are what you hope the horse follows. If they don't follow it, you use your supporting aids to come to the lead rope. So that's an important distinction because you're not just chasing the horse forward, you're saying go from here to me. So if your horse's attention is over here, you just do as much driving as you need to do to bring her back to you. And that might be, you might repeat it a handful of times until she starts to look for the lead rope, and then you try to do less and less supporting aids and more just on the lead rope. I noticed my new horse developed more on one side of the neck than the other, viewing this from the saddle. Can we develop the other side to be more even? Yes, you can. That's what I work on in my in-hand course and my lunging course. We talk about that all the time because that is super common. So the reason that happens, for one, is because the horse is using unequal amount of muscling to get a task done. So in other words, they're overusing one side and underusing the other side. So in order to even that out, we need to get the horse to stop thinking so much about this side and thinking more about this side. So assuming the side is the bigger side, because it often is. So what you want the horse to do is to actually, I call it spreading the body map, spreading the awareness. You want the horse to stop thinking about this as the solution to all the problems, and this and all the rest of the body is a little bit more participatory part of solution for the horse. So something I'll often say is that stiffness is a solution to a stability problem. So if they're overusing this, they're probably underusing their hind leg. And so the solution to a horse's crookedness is to get them to use their whole body equally. Where that starts is getting the horse to be in good alignment and in good rhythm. So if you get a rhythmic way of going, if the horse can walk or trot or canter to a steady count, then they're going to be using their whole body more equally and they're going to get straighter over time. Sometimes they can look straighter in one session, but the muscle takes time to actually change the way that it's developed, because your overdeveloped muscle actually has to be reabsorbed and carried out as waste, and then the other side has to be developed. I am moving stables after years of trauma for my 8-year-old. Can't believe it took me so long, but how do I restart our relationship for trust? We are doing leadless groundwork now for comfort and tension relief. We have 3 weeks until I move. Is there anything I can do? Yeah, that's a bummer, and it happens a lot, so don't feel bad. It sometimes can be really hard to find a good barn out there, and sometimes you have to take what you can get, right? So what I usually say is that if you have a hole that you're in, the first thing you need to do is stop digging, right? So you're already doing that. Whatever is causing the problem, you have stopped digging the hole bigger. So you're moving barns, you're finding another place, you're starting over. That being said, both of you carry a memory and you're not just going to flip right over. I think the most important thing to think about is that it's not going to switch over immediately, and don't panic if it doesn't. Give it the time that it needs to roll over and change, because there's going to be a suspicion period for both of you. Horse might be worried you're going to do something. You're going to be worried the horse is going to do something. So kind of the mentality here is just to sort of relax into the process and don't worry if it feels bad for a little while, because you're both going to be recovering. Try your best to tidy up all of these things. but do so with the mentality that neither of you are wrong for the way you feel, and neither one of you has to be fixed. You're just adapting to the situation that has been created, right? Where you're both a little suspicious or not feeling so good. So as you go on to change that process, it's going to unwind kind of over time, and it's going to take the time that both of you need. I think it's really good to get support, to get body work or some kind of support for you as well, so that you can start to recondition a lot of your handling habits. Because when you get scared or and you feel bad, it comes with its own set of postural reflexes, basically. And so you get more into a reaction mode than into an actual guiding mode. And that's very normal. And it's actually a healthy way to be when you are in trouble, but it's important to be able to get out of that. So getting some support with something like Feldenkrais or therapy, or even just somebody who can listen to you and not judge you, anything that both of you need supportive to get through that, along with good handling, will be really helpful. And again, the mentality here is a non-judgment one, that neither one of you are doing anything wrong. You're just trying to adapt to your new life going forward and let it take time. That you're going to be unraveling stuff going forward, and don't feel bad for any of the stuff that might come out. None of it, I wouldn't take any of it personally.
One of the things that I'm looking forward to is he's going to have nice, stable mates instead of angry alpha, inappropriate alphas. That's been, he's been literally chased and beat up for years. So I'm getting him nice, stable mates, nice pasture mates. I think that'll take a little bit of the edge off. We get chased by dogs at this place.
Yeah.
We get chased by dogs at night, and they're herding dogs. And you know, the owner of the stable says, well, he should just get used to that. And I'm like, they're herding dogs. He's never going to get used to that, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm looking for a place that, you know, doesn't have a lot of dogs that I have to ride with, that kind of thing. So anyway, trying to make, and we're doing a 2-day clinic as soon as we get there. From a beginner standpoint, I'm an experienced rider. I've raised great horses, but we're going to take let's start from the beginning clinic by a pretty famous Western guy. So I'm trying to line up good situations, as you suggested.
Yeah, and I would give it a full 30 days to let him really decompress into his new herd situation. In other words, just expect it to be a full 30 days before he's really settled in.
I hope it happens that quick.
Yeah, it might be more, but that whenever I have horses that come in here that are kind of shell-shocked, I often leave them completely alone for a full 30 days just to kind of let them reassess life, or keep my expectation pretty low. Just because sometimes they come in just kind of shell-shocked, you know?
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Do I like hybrid halters? Nylon webbing on the pole and rope with knots over the nose? Yeah, I'm not super picky about halters as long as they're comfortable and fit well. And I think, you know, if it feels good in your hand and it makes sense to the horse, I don't see anything wrong with it. I don't happen to own any, but I haven't disliked any of them. I haven't seen them all, but again, as long as it's not uncomfortable, and as long as it fits the horse's face well and gets the job done, then that's the most important thing. Mary, thank you for your sweet comment. Mary says, one of the things that is great about taking a course with Amy is she will help you get creative when you have something happening with your horse and need an adaptation to a way it is originally being done. Really lovely to have individual coaching folks. Not all trainers will adapt for you, and Amy does. One thing that's really sweet of you. Thank you. One thing that's really important for me to pass on to a student or anyone who's asking me a question really is that nothing is cut and dry, right? And so when you have a problem, especially if I'm not there with you. You know your horse best, and your horse is there. It's very important to me that you don't give up your powers of observation, your powers of thinking, and your powers of being there. Don't forget, it's your life on the line and your horse's life on the line. I'm sitting here in a comfortable chair talking to you. I'm not in any kind of a risk situation. And so it's very important for me, for people who are on the other side of the fence, the more dangerous side of the fence, the more important side of the fence, is that you get to think creatively and think outside of the box, because it's you and your horse really that are the ones that are going to be benefited or not by the work you do. So there are ways that I think things should be done, but there are always outliers. And just like all art, you learn the rules and then you break them, right? And so learning technique is really important. And there are some step-by-step things that generally work, but there's always outliers. And so when you have trouble with your horse or when something isn't going right, what I always encourage people to do is to think and assess the situation. What do you think is happening and why? What are the ingredients going into it? What do you think you can tweak to help? What skill set is missing? Or what can you try? And I think it's really important to say to people that the reason that I have learned how to handle the worst of the worst horses, because that's usually what I deal with, is the horse that are on death row, right? They're the worst of the worst. They're the most lame. They're the most troubled. They're the most dangerous. Is a lot of the stuff that I have learned that works on 90% of the horses doesn't work on those guys. And the reason that I learned how to handle them was by breaking the rules, right? The things that I was taught always and never. Always and never is not a real reality, right? For most of us. So being flexible and thinking outside of the box sometimes can go a long ways. Is it acceptable? Oh, I think that question maybe was already answered. Maybe I got mixed up in my comment. It was about approaching on the right side, which is yes, it is acceptable. All of your lovely comments. Thank you all so much. That was really wonderful to read those. Let's see. My horse leads well. This is Christy's question. My horse leads well and loads well, but still has separation anxiety from my other horse. I am conflicted about actually trailering him alone, but if I start trailing with my other horse, don't want to exacerbate the anxiety when I want to trailer him alone at some point. Yeah, that's a super common thing, especially if you only have two horses, which I don't know how many horses you have, but it's very normal for horses to be attached to the other horse. Super normal. And separation anxiety it's natural for a horse. It's one thing that I think is important to understand is that horses were designed to be in a herd and they weren't meant to be alone. So the art of teaching the horse how to be comfortable alone is totally counter to their nature. So it's a pretty crazy thing to put a horse in a box of death and take them off on a drive down the road without a buddy, but they do it all the time and they can adapt. I think horses are so amazing for that reason. But I'm a big fan of starting out where it's easy for the horse and then developing that skill set often. And when I was younger, when I was training horses that had a problem, I would fix the problem by practicing the thing I wanted them to do. So, for example, the horse doesn't load well by himself or travel well by himself, so I would practice loading him by himself over and over and over and over and over. And what I inadvertently did without meaning to was really cementing into the horse's head how bad trailering alone was because they had to practice anxiety over and over. One thing that my teacher Brent Graff always says is don't let the horse practice doing something the way that you don't want it. And that has stuck in my head forever. And I think about it all the time. And what it ends up doing for me is creating more concessions for horses than I ever did before, because I want the horse to experience being calm trailering. And so what I would do is trailer it with the horse with the buddy until he was good at it. And then maybe take a short drive without one day with something really nice to eat, like a flake of alfalfa, something they don't usually get, right? So the trailer slowly starts to become someplace that they've had a lot of practice being comfortable in, and then you slowly make your bridges. So there's a big difference between using something as a crutch and using it as a bridge. But if you're using it as a bridge, you're going to build on the confidence that you're creating and then slowly change the experience to get the horse to where you want them to be. And a crutch is something you can never live without. So if you take the buddy out, he falls apart. So you use your concessions as a bridge and then build. And I hope that helps. But I try to feed my horses like the best day I have in the trailer so that by the time they have lots of practice being confident, they're like, oh yeah, nobody's going to get my hay. This hay is so awesome and none of you fools can touch it. Because I have 6 horses here who all had severe trailering anxiety, and now they load at 4 a.m. in the dark by themselves happily, but that didn't come overnight. It took a lot of practice. It took a lot of confidence building. And I will say that outside of the trailer, the confidence building away from the buddy is another thing to think about, is you just generally get this horse confident with you and all the other aspects, and the trailer is kind of an extension of that. Okay, here we go. Mine will trailer fine and ride fine. This is Kathy's question. Trailer's fine and ride's fine from home without the buddy, but I can't ride her away from the house even with another non-buddy horse. So kind of the same thing there is use your concessions and build on them. Um, so if you can't ride away from the house without another horse, sometimes I like to play around with what I call like hopscotch with horses. You have two horses side by side. This is their comfort zone. They're glued together and we're best friends and we're never going to leave each other. And if we do, we'll die, right? So you start out right here, and then you might go here and come back. And then you might go here and come back. And then you might go around to a bush and come back. And then pretty soon there's another bush a little bit farther away. And then you go into this little like relay race kind of a situation. And what you're doing is you're starting at the comfort zone of the horse, which is glued together, holding hands, being besties. And you gradually increase that until they are almost on the edge of being uncomfortable, but not so far. They're like, wait a minute, okay, we're coming back. And then within a few rides, pretty soon you can be side by side, front and front. And what the horse starts to realize is that they always come back and they can start, but you don't just take them away and take them back. You say, let's ride over to this little shrub, do a circle and come back. So you're giving them a little job, bringing them back together, and you're making it easy for the horse to understand that you're not just ripping it away from the friend and saying don't cry about it or give you something to cry about. You're giving them something to do to focus on and then bringing them back to comfort. So if your window of tolerance is that big, you can only stretch it by that big or you'll blow it up. So you don't go from here to here, you go here and then back and here and back. So you stretch it like a rubber band, because a rubber band, if you stretch it a little at a time and let it come back, it gets more stretched out, right? But if you just pull it apart, it'll actually snap. And that's what we want to think about with horses is you stretch the comfort zone like you would a rubber band that's really, really stiff, is let it work back and forth a little bit. All right. Any other questions that were not written in the chat? We've got to the bottom of the chat. You are very welcome. So Kevin has put in the chat the corrected link. And if you look up in the chat, there's a couple links that people posted to good lead lines, good lunge lines. That's something you might want to look at too. Really appreciate you guys for sharing that.
Yep. And just a reminder that everybody will get an email sometime soon with the recording in it, and also the link to the discount offers. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Somebody asked in the chat earlier if there was going to be the slides accessible, and they're not. The slides themselves aren't, but you'll be able to like see them in the recording when you play.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll see them in the recording. You'll be able to watch the slides again. And you have this recording to keep once it comes into your inbox. Any last minute questions? This is Woody. Woody is in all my Zoom calls. He is the best teacher because he articulates everything except his rib cage. I wish that he articulated his rib cage, but I don't know how to get him to do that. But if you want one of these guys, I got this on Amazon too. And I think I just looked at drawing models. It's just a little drawing model. Oh, here's a question. It's Kelly's question. Do you have any resources that could help me figure out how to de-escalate my horse when I'm in the saddle? She comes from a younger gal who rode fast and bareback, and I'm interested in walking trail rides. We do speed control groundwork, but in the saddle, all bets are off. She is a constant jog and increasingly likes to go faster, especially on straightaways. We do circles, back up, stop, and restart. Any other tricks I can research? Yeah. Okay. So Kelly, that's a lot like retraining a barrel horse or a rodeo horse or any horse who is trained to do speed. Is you can ideally the groundwork applies to the saddle, but that's not always the case when the saddle time has been totally different, right? When you basically have the sensation. Kevin, how would you describe this? Remember when I drove? So one time I drove to Sheboygan, Michigan and back in one trip. And what happened was on the drive back, I drove all through the night and I got super, super tired. I had a horse with me in the trailer and I couldn't stop and it started raining and it was the crappiest drive of my life. What happened during that drive was I got super tired and like kind of half crazy, like you get in the middle of the night at 4 a.m. after driving for a million hours. So once I finished that drive, every time I got back in my car, I would get exhausted. It didn't matter if it was a 15-minute drive to the post office or a 2-hour drive to something. I would get it behind the wheel and I would get exhausted. And so what had happened, maybe you can explain this better, Kevin, was that my mind had become conditioned to the feeling that I had when that drive, whenever I got in the car, right? And that's what can happen to a lot of horses who are ridden in a certain way. So you get in the saddle, they think it's all time to go, 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 go. And their mind is stuck in that loop, right? So what you want to do is you can't fight the energy because the horse is certain that they're supposed to go and you're fighting them. And so they actually become more determined to go. So what you want to do is break the loop. And what that can look like is changing the job, especially if you just want to go forward on the trail on a nice slow speed. That can be really hard for that kind of horse. So when I'm retraining a barrel horse, I won't ask them to slow down, but I will ask them to do different jobs that feel different. And I try not to set them up for the experience of just going straight initially because they can't stop themselves from slowing down. And it turns into this kind of a battle between the horse and the rider. So I might weave cones tightly a lot just to give the horse the feeling of having something to do with a break in the speed because you can't go too fast around these cones, right? So you're going from a left bend to a right bend, but you have to move with your aids as if you're on ice. Like you're spinning out if your car is spinning out on ice, you don't react quickly. You go very, very slowly, right? So you're weaving to the left and to the right and to the left and to the right. And when it feels like the horse is calming down, I might offer them a straight line and see how they do. And in the minute they get anxious again, I go back to the cones. But the important part here is that you're going very smoothly yourself. And then you might go around a little shrub and another little tree and another little shrub. So you're giving the horse something else to think about other than just going fast. And then over time, they start to kind of get the ability to go straight. And as soon as they go slow, as soon as they get upset again, you just gently go back to the gentle winding turns. But don't give them so much space between two cones that they can speed up a lot. So it's kind of like your little ribbon candy. You're doing gentle little loops. And that's very helpful because it gives the horse the opportunity to bring their mind and their body together in the same place. Because remember that they are doing what they think they're supposed to be doing. So you get on the horse and the horse is like, time to go crazy, right? I'm just really glad I didn't have a horse when I was a teenage girl because I would have definitely done that to the horse. But you want to help them understand that they have a new job. They have to get into a new feeling. And sometimes it can even help to change the tack just to get, it's not going to fix everything, but it can help to change the feeling, right? I drove to Sheboygan, Michigan in my truck, so I had to drive in a car for a while until I got out of that crazy tired loop.
Yeah,
The
other analogy that's like that some people can relate to, although it is smoking cigarettes. Like if you were a smoker in the past, or you knew somebody who was a smoker, and if you watch them, every time they pick up the phone, they light up a cigarette. Every time they get in their car, they light up a cigarette. And there's 100 things that are those, I think it was Mary that said those triggers or those associations. It's not people think it's addictive and your addiction is triggered then. That's not what it is. It's just a habit or an association. And we're doing those habits and associations all the time, all day long. You really watch yourself or you watch other people, you'll notice that certain situations, certain things trigger certain behaviors. And the horses happens all the time.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons that our habits are so important because a lot of times we don't realize that we have a habit that triggers the horse's habit and we're kind of ping-ponging off of each other. So one of the most important parts when I get a horse in training who has a habit that is dangerous is then the client cannot go back to their habit because it exacerbates the horse's habit. So for example, let's say the horse rears, the client gets worried about the rearing and they pull the line. The horse is like, oh, that triggered. And then we have rearing. So you kind of have to do something that you've never done to get something you've never gotten, right? Is you have to change the feeling that you're supplying to the horse. I'm not saying you caused it. It doesn't matter to the horse though, is you activate the trigger goes off, right? So we've got to change the feeling to the horse and help them understand. So if the horse can't go slow, they're missing a skill set. So don't activate the trigger as much as you can and provide the skill set that they're missing. So a lot of the time, that horse just simply doesn't understand the reins at all, or any of the aids, because if you're just flying around, then that's totally different. There's no skill sets there, right? It doesn't take anything to make a horse run. Lots of people do it every day. So we're missing a lot of skill sets. You didn't create the problem, but unfortunately, you're the one receiving it. And so you have to help the horse develop the skill sets required for walking straight on the trail. That's a great question, because that is a really common one. And any horse that has been ridden with just speed, if they're not doing versatile activities, they're on a one-track loop. So they can get pretty unconfident outside of their skill set. Very good questions, you guys. Thanks for asking such good questions. Because all of these things are stuff people deal with all over the place every day. So that's one thing I really encourage people to think about, is if you think you're the only one with the problem, you're just either around people who aren't admitting that they have a problem, or you haven't branched out enough to find other people with that problem. Because I've been around the world teaching people everywhere, and I've seen it all over the place. So you're definitely not alone. We've all experienced them. And I think it's really important too to shift the mindset out of whose fault is it. Because one thing I often think of is it doesn't matter whose fault it is. The problem is here. What are you going to do about it? Doesn't matter who created it. Doesn't matter if you created it. Doesn't matter if you're doing it right now. Just start to look at the situation from a broader perspective. Zoom out a little bit and see what you've got going. Why is the horse doing this? And what can we do about it? And that's what I like to help people with, is to take away the judgment of the horse and the human and just get curious and observe. What are we actually dealing with, and why? What skill set is missing, or what are we activating, and what can we do about it? And I think that's a much more confidence boosting a way to look at stuff, and it's much more helpful to the horse, because the judgment doesn't really help us or the horse. So that's the way I like to look at things, is what can be done about it, because every single human on earth is going to accidentally make mistakes here and there. So getting to be aware and mindful of our habits, learning to have better habits, it goes a long way. All right, you guys, I have really enjoyed this time with you guys. Thank you guys so much for your questions and for coming on to this call. Again, you'll get the recording in your inbox, and you know where to find me if you need anything. I guess, do you know where to find me if you need anything? You know, my website is amyskinnerhorsemanship.com. You can contact me through there. I have a YouTube, a TikTok, a Facebook, a carrier pigeon, a smoke signals, a Tweedledee, and all of those stuffs. All of the many different avenues where you can contact me on. So thank you guys very much. I'll catch you some other time and hope to see you again.